Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BA Insight session. And today I'm really excited, really three excellent guests. We're talking about storytelling in business analysis, and that's definitely a key skill that most of us do, and certainly those that aren't, you definitely should be. So I'm sure this session will be really informative. Just before we move on and do some introductions and get started on the session, of course, it'd be remiss of me not to ask for you to subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a like on the video because it's a really good way to make sure it's shared with others in the BA community. And really importantly, if you've got any comments, you've got insight you want to share yourself, please comment. It'd be excellent to hear your view and your opinions as well. All right. But anyway, without further ado, let's go on and do some introductions. And very pleased to start with Paula.
Hi, thanks for having me, John. I am Paula Bell. I am based in Iowa, originally from Brooklyn, New York. My family's from Barbados. I've been in the business analysis field for over 2 decades, so I'm not going to say my age, but over 2 decades. I love business analysis. I've always had an interest in it, and it always came natural to me as hearing about individuals or corporations' problems and then coming up with solutions to help them gain the transformation that they desire. So I love doing that. I'm also very active in the BA community as far as a speaker, writing articles, things of that nature. But also on the other side of that, I'm just active in the community, period, working with the youth, working with adults, just being that motivation, encouragement, and inspiration to others. And I'm also the owner of my own coaching, consulting, and speaking company, Paula A. Bell Consulting.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Paula. And I can definitely attest to your skills in the community point because obviously you introduced Michael to us as well. So, you know, absolutely. So over to Nikhil, we can.
Yeah, thank you, John, for having me today. And I'm really glad to be part of this conversation alongside with Paula and Michael. And I'm Nikhil, a business consultant and mentor, IIBA, CBAP certified and Six Sigma. Also, I've been working into the business analysis and project management for about 14 years now and helping organizations bridge strategy and execution through business analysis. And I've authored two books called Project Management Playbook and Business Analysis Essential Guide, as well as co-founded Noors TechServe, which is more into delivering tech-enabled business solutions. And currently, I'm working on creating or developing a community called ThinkSpace, which is particularly for BA and PMs professional who want to upscale or know how the path could be, what are the skill sets they should be learning, etc., etc. And what really drives is storytelling. That's what the topic is today. And I believe it's the most underrated skill for business analysis. And I'm very excited for the discussion today, along with Paula and Michael. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nikhil.
My name is Michael White. I'm the founder of the Business Analysis Doctor. I focus on business analysis certification training as well as hands-on business analysis training and coaching. I've been a business analysis practitioner for over a decade, and I see that looks like people are frozen. Can you all still hear me?
We can, Michael. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can.
All right. So yeah, I've been a business analysis practitioner for over a decade. And I just really enjoy business analysis overall, and I enjoy teaching it to people. So that's pretty much my background. Well, corporately, my background is in finance and banking, but of course, various levels of business analysis throughout those years. So of course, that transition over to the training and coaching. So here I am.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael. All right, excellent. Okay, but okay, well, let's dive into the first question then. I'm going to ask this one to Paula. So, Paula, why is storytelling important for business analysts?
Yeah, so Nikhil brought up something that's very true. It's an underrated skill for BAs, right? For me, the work that we do on these projects can be quite complex. And sometimes a story is a very quick and easy way to break down something very complex into something simple. People tend to remember a story, right? People tend to engage with a story. People tend to connect to a story. So if you can frame it up as a story, that is something that people can relate to and understand the why behind whatever the task that you're doing, or whatever part of business analysis that you're doing at that part, it can definitely help an individual wrap their mind around the concept as a whole, where they fit in the concept, and how they add value and benefit to whatever we're discussing. It also, from what I've found, can help bridge sometimes the gap between the business and the technical team, because sometimes the technical team may not understand exactly what the business is going through. They understand the architecture, they understand the technology, but they may not understand some of the challenges and frustrations that the business is going through. If you can identify that and put it into a story that will make sense to them, that will help them get the clarity that they need to stand behind the business, get buy-in, and help the business transform the way that they want to, it can be very, very powerful. I think sometimes we forget that we are human and that we all have different realities. And though you may not experience that reality, doesn't mean it's not real. And telling that story can help people understand that reality that's real to you.
Excellent, brilliant, brilliant start. Paul, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. Nikhil, what will be your perspective? Nikhil, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, so Paula did actually cover most of the point, and as I earlier mentioned in the introduction, that it is most underrated. And why I feel so is because uh, as Paula mentioned, that it actually connects and bridges between the technical team and the stakeholders or the clients. It actually gives the clarity between the understanding, and most of the time we actually get stuck, or any project gets stuck, is because of the understanding. If the technical team is clearly understood what exactly is the requirement, it definitely helps and cut shorts the back and forth that might have happened because of lack of understanding. And one more point that I feel is storytelling builds empathy with humanizing the complex solution and understanding the requirement, and not just presenting what exactly is the stakeholders expecting out of any product or any service. So humanizing with empathy is basically more relevant and very clearly understood when we simply don't give present it as a presentation. So, like Paula also mentioned earlier, that humans remember the story instead of the particular incident or the entire presentation. So, having a storytelling or having the requirement presented as a story, it obviously gives an advantage.
That's it. And as you say, I mean, it brings that clarity for those different stakeholders who might have different levels of understanding, and really emphasises the point that Paula made as well. And Michael, what would be your perspective on that same point?
Yeah, it's really kind of hard to follow that, right, with those wonderful explanations. But I think the only thing that I could add to what they said is that with stories, people's brains are designed to remember stories. So in addition to that, that means that it's a retention tool. So, you don't want to be in an environment where you're presenting information and it's one ear and out the other. You can use that storytelling aspect to get people to retain that information. So that's the little tidbit that I'll add.
There we go. And I agree. Paula and Nikhil did such a good job of introducing that question and answering it. There's scraps left for you and I, Michael, on that one.
Yeah.
And as such, I mean, I think really it's just the only extra thing I'd add probably is that it really does help that empathy and brings together quite diverse stakeholders sometimes who may not necessarily know the situation. But I do run the risk of repeating the parts that Paula and Nikhil made, so I won't do that. Instead, what I'll do is I'll ask Nikhil really around what the benefits of storytelling might be in relation to business analysis. Are there any others, and not just around those that we've mentioned before?
Yeah, so benefits can be a lot of benefits, but one that comes to my mind right away is something which is clarity, engagement, or it helps in coming to a decision, or probably we can call it decision-making ability. It improves it because obviously we get the clarity from the stories that we hear about the requirement. Also, it helps in adoption of any change if there is any requirement of any changes to be implemented or adopted in the entire process. So stories definitely help teams envision the problems that might come in the entire process of development. So before and after reduces the resistance is something that I feel is one of the biggest benefit. Again, the same thing comes in engagement where the stakeholders are hooked up with the requirement as well as the entire process, and they can see themselves as a user as well as a anybody in the entire process, like be it sponsor, be it any end user or stakeholder, any sort of stakeholder. They can see them, they can understand the pain point from the entire story and exactly come with the feedback, which will definitely help to make any changes or implement any feature or any functionality. That's what I feel are the benefits.
Yeah, and that's really quite an interesting point, actually, Nikhil, the fact that the benefits of being able to tell that story and piece together different parts of the analysis and present them in a way that's understandable and obviously, without repeating the points you and Paula made earlier, it helps bring that diverse group together. It helps present some clarity where there's complexity, amongst other things as well. I know it's probably fairly similar actually to probably why importance versus benefit is probably quite similar. So I guess Michael or Paula, is there anything you might add on that point? I'll start with Michael in case there's anything further you might want to share on benefits anyway.
Yeah, one of the things Nikhil had said was about decision making. And I think when you are really trying to get everyone to agree and get on the same page, the storytelling can be really powerful because typically everybody kind of has their own perception of things or, their own way of thinking. But if you can share a story and allow everybody to kind of put themselves and create that shared experience, then that's how you can get a shared agreement or everybody to come to a consensus, right? Because we're really trying to get everybody to that same place. So storytelling can be really effective at that.
And Paula, would you add anything more?
Well, you all done took three of mine, right? I had clarity, I had alignment. Thank you, Michael. I had memory. Thank you, Michael. So the other piece I would say that I was thinking of for this question is influence, which kind of goes back to what Michael was just saying. The stories that you tell, again, as Nikhil said, it goes to empathy. It hits that emotional aspect of individuals. And so a lot of times when you can tell that story in such a compelling way, it can influence and advocate for the best solution. And so sometimes you can't always use data. Data doesn't always work for people to get that consensus and that buy-in. But if you can tell a story that really is compelling and impacts at that emotional level, it can really help in influencing and persuading the best solution.
That's an interesting point as well, Paul, because that influence really touched on the point Michael was saying in terms of you've got those different perspectives of making sure that you're telling a story that's resonating with each of those different perspectives, and they can understand why it's important to them, why they should be listening, why they should care as well. I couldn't agree more with what the three of you said. I think on top of that, I think just the perhaps the other benefit of storytelling can maybe just make things feel a bit more interesting, because I think it can appear perhaps sometimes that that at least on the face of it, if we're about to present some requirements or about to share some models, maybe that isn't always as interesting to some stakeholders as we might believe it is as BAs anyway. So shaping it around a story, piecing these things together and show almost like the evolution of the analysis and how it knits together and how it relates to the situation and perspectives, I think can make things interesting. And not just for the audience, actually. I think we make things interesting from a BA's perspective, because as you find different ways to tell a story, that actually starts to tap into that creative side that I believe most of us probably have. But probably that's definitely all I can say. Michael, how can we incorporate more of our storytelling into business analysis?
Well, the interesting thing about storytelling is I feel like it's just become really kind of mainstream over the past couple of years, just the word storytelling itself. So it seems like this new thing, but really everything that business analysts do is storytelling, right? It's really just, well, first of all, when you just understand what storytelling is really just creating a narrative to, share your experience. And again, like I said earlier, create that shared experience. So most of the techniques we're doing today, when you create a BRD, you are literally telling a story of you're giving context with the problem, you're sharing the current state, you're all of that, process mapping. You are telling a story of how things are done today visually, right? So, just stepping back and just thinking about what storytelling is and looking at all of the things that you're doing now. Am I telling a story? When I create my BRD, am I telling a story? When you create user stories, right, you want to, of course, eventually we need to prioritize them based off of value, but that's why we have techniques like story mapping, right? Because you're organizing the stories in a way to go through the flow of a process or the flow of an activity, and then we kind of prioritize them based on how we want to deliver them, right? So it's just really understanding that a lot of the techniques that we're already using today are already designed to tell the story. We just want to make sure that that's like one of the checkbox items that's included, right? Um, you know, Customer journey mapping, right? Let's go through the journey of the customer's day-to-day activity, right? So basically they're walking us through their journey. So they're telling us a story and we're capturing it visually, right? So it's really not necessary. I don't think that it's necessarily how can we incorporate more storytelling. It's really acknowledging where the storytelling is actually happening and how we can leverage that, right? So I would just say, oh, one other thing is when we are doing elicitation, that's a big piece, right? We're trying to understand the story from the user's perspective or from their experience, right? And we're trying to capture that so that we can have that context and background. So again, like I said, it's really just understanding where the storytelling is already happening. That way we can kind of hone in on, maybe how we could be a little bit more effective and how to sharpen up on it in the activities that we're already doing.
Yeah, and a number of interesting points. I'm going to deliberately refrain from commenting on because I feel like I may end up taking some potential answers away from Paula and Nikhil. So I'm going to let them go first. Starting with Paula.
So yeah, Michael brings up a very good point as he talks about the different techniques that we use, and we are already doing it. I would say be intentional about doing it. If you have a situation where you are eliciting requirements or you are in a workshop and you just know that some people are just having a hard time understanding the concept, use analogies, use metaphors to help people understand. I think sometimes with business analysis, no, I don't think, I know sometimes with business analysis, we can overcomplicate it because there's so many tools, resources, methodologies, there's so many different specializations But I've always said, and I still believe this today, the fundamentals of business analysis has not changed. And for me, parts of the fundamentals is you have to be able to communicate and build relationships with people so that they trust you to work and collaborate with you and to work with you on a team. And if you think about just in our day-to-day life, we tell stories all the time. When we interact with our family, when
Absolutely.
we interact with our friends, we tell stories all the time. When we're trying to bring forth a concept, we use analogies and metaphors all the time. We do the same thing in business analysis. When you step away from thinking of business analysis as just a role that you do, it is just a job description. It's just what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to do it in this context. When you step away from that and you really think about what we are doing, we as business analysts are transforming organizations, helping them solve their problems. That is very human interaction to me.
Yeah.
So therefore, just be real intentional and give people grace and give them that empathy, give that emotional intelligence to know that you might have to approach the buy-in and helping stakeholders understand the concepts and the solutions by meeting them where they're at through a story. Just as simple as that, right? So it's just being more intentional about that and not getting caught up in all the noise that I have to know this, I have to know that, we have to do it this way. It has to be done this way in order to get this data. Not necessarily. That's the beauty of business analysis. That's why I love it. It's very gray. It's not
Yeah.
always black and white. I've never done the same project the same way. And this is the only time I will use the word never. I have never done the project the same way because they're all different. It's different people, different personalities, different circumstances. So just go in and have fun with it and be intentional about it and meet people on that human level.
Yeah, I mean, there's some excellent points at Paula. It's interesting actually because I think you're right that we all think sometimes that project, or from the outside, it might look that we follow the same process every project, but actually we don't because we never work with the same set of stakeholders on the same projects, the same needs, or the same products, and therefore you're always trying to bring different perspectives together in a different way for a different audience, and that storytelling, as you said, is a perfect way of doing it. And I like the way as well you talk about into that emotional intelligence. It really means that you're adapting to your stakeholders, your situation, and it brings in some of the points Michael was making as well about that elicitation and the importance of it being open. Nikhil, some hard X to follow there in terms of some answers, but I'm sure you have some points of yours.
Actually, honestly, Paula and Michael covered almost everything. And while Paula was speaking, I was actually thinking that she is actually reading my mind out because most of the points and the terminologies or the specifically the analogy part, I really had that point in my mind to speak. But Paula and Michael correctly said that there are a few points that I really liked from Michael's part, where he mentioned that it is not how you are presenting it or how you are telling the story. It is about feeling, understanding, and then presenting it. Then only it makes a difference and impact. Otherwise, if we have a scripted story to tell or any scripted or any template to use, then it doesn't give us storytelling, but it is just another piece of document in the project. So understanding the pain areas of the stakeholders or any team member, whether it is technical team, QA, or any person involved in that project is definitely an important aspect for storytelling. Coming to Paula's point, analogy and using real world experience or examples is again definitely one of the most important aspect of storytelling. I feel using personas or journeys will also help in terms of expressing or presenting the story or presenting your point in front of the team or stakeholders, because using personas or journeys is something which helps build stories in a proper way and shows the needs or frustration or pain areas very effectively rather than putting it in a different way. So that's something that I would add as a two cents of mine.
Yeah, brilliant. And actually, by introducing the the personas, you're introducing in a similar way that an author of a book might start to introduce the characters, and the characters are obviously key to any story. So it's good that you brought out the personas, and that obviously will tie to the journey maps as well that I think Michael mentioned a moment ago. I've certainly got a fair few things I think I could add in this aspect as well. I think at a point Michael made a little while ago, I think maybe when he was talking about elicitation, made me recognise well the importance of, as a BA, allowing the stakeholders you work with not just to listen to your story, but actually to tell theirs as well. And actually the importance of it is definitely two ways. And actually perhaps by listening to people's stories, you might not only appreciate their perspective and their additional information that they're sharing, but actually maybe some better ways, more effective ways to tell a story yourself. So I think it's important in that dimension.
So there's one more thing that came to my mind. Sure. I forgot to mention earlier. So if I may, you mentioned, John, in your part where in emotional intelligence and AI, a lot of people recently started asking this question that will AI replace our jobs or take our jobs or replace BAs? So this is something which is very important where AI cannot perform as a BA telling the story or using the storytelling as a technique. I agree where people think that they might be, as an AI tools, might be able to create BRDs, FRS, SRS, all sort of documents, but definitely giving the emotional intelligence or touch or empathizing or giving a humanized touch to any aspect of the entire process, that is something where human BA will definitely be required at any point of time. So I advise people that AI is not going to replace you or take your job. Person who knows AI will definitely be able to replace or take your job away. So upskilling and learning new techniques and technology is the key that I feel is something which aspiring BAs or people who are worried should understand.
Yeah, perhaps with that we can actually use AI to help us tell our stories and make it a bit more interesting, or bring it to life, or think about some different perspectives as well. Definitely an interesting point, Nikhil. I think on top of that, I would also say that there's an opportunity for us in terms of storytelling, in terms of not just thinking about the stakeholders that we would traditionally take the requirements to, such as technology or external partners, etc. But more thinking as well about how can we use storytelling to engage the stakeholders in the first place, or to help them when it comes to adopting some of the solutions we're working with. Because I think it's all very well us approaching members of the organisation that we work with and different stakeholders and asking for their opinion and asking for requirements. But I think there's the more we can engage with those individuals, given the context, and help them understand why we're talking and what the project is and what it is we're working on, and maybe a little bit about what's gone before this conversation, can help really get the best out of what they've got to share, and help them maybe focusing on some aspects that we really need from them as well. I think as well, there's probably some other aspects which, in terms of how to incorporate storytelling into our analysis, and I think it's almost like thinking about the construct of a story, which is very much a start, a middle, and an end. There's what happens before, what's happened after. And I think that sort of mentality helps as well, because no one will want to read a story where there's only an end. We need the three things to come together. And I think taking the inspiration from Michael's point on the BRD, that's the same. We need that open, that introduction. What is it we're trying to achieve? What's the scope in the background? The middle, if you like, is the requirements, and possibly the end is the recommendation, the most important things, the takeaways, as it were. But I feel like I'll probably talk about that one for a lot longer. So, but I won't. I'll leave it for now. Because we're sort of drifting as well nicely onto techniques, I think, and possibly even tools, but techniques probably more so. And I know, thanks to Nico, you mentioned personas already. Michael's already mentioned journeys, I think, as Paula did as well. But I wonder, Paula, are there any additional techniques or tools that you might use to support your storytelling? or your BA storytelling?
So I would say, yeah, Michael and Nikhil mentioned a lot of them already. Um, Prototypes, mock-ups, wireframes, those sort of things to check your understanding. 'Cause that goes back to the clarity, right? So there are those sort of things that you can leverage as far as techniques and tools that we already use today as business analysts. One tool that or technique that I use quite a bit when I'm speaking are videos. So if I'm trying to get a point across, sometimes, you could talk to your blue in the face, right? You can talk, and they're not going to get it. But if they see it coming from a different perspective, they see it coming from like a real life video or a real life experience that's outside of the group that is working the project, that can bring a different level of understanding and insight. So I've found that using videos of real life experiences, because the visual is just something that captures people. Again, it feels like they're part of it. It's engaging their emotions. And so video for me is very telling. So I'll give you an example of when I've used video, not actually to transform a problem, but to use video to get rid of conflict, because we had conflict on the team that wasn't allowing us to actually get the business analysis work done. And so I found a series of videos that a training company did, and it was like 30-second scenarios. And they watched the 30-second scenario, and then we talked about it. Well, what did you see in this particular scenario? Right. There were times where people's voices weren't heard. There were times when they weren't even looked at, right? Just by they came into the room, it was a very male dominated room and it was just a female. And she felt like she wasn't even in the room, even though she was there. Just different scenarios like that. And that opened up conversation on how people were feeling just from watching other scenarios that were outside of them. It demonstrates that we're not the only ones who go through this, number one. So this isn't just unique to us. And number two, it can be resolved, right? So sometimes I've used video to help get concepts and points across. If I am feeling that the project team itself, we on the project team ourselves, aren't making a lot of headway, in addition to everything that's already been said. Personas, I love personas. Personas really makes you think. I love writing personas. Customer journey mapping, just understanding where you want the emotions that customers can go through. Process mapping, all of those things that have already been mentioned. But I would just add video in there as well. Sometimes it takes somebody else to explain it if you can't get the
Yeah,
point across.
yeah, that's a really interesting point, Paul. And actually, it's funny. I know you went on to describe it, and at first I was thinking, oh, what sort of example would a video be useful in this context? But the more you went to explain it, the more you can see videos being relevant in so many different ways. And I think even just to one of the points you were alluding to there or making that that it almost feels like it lubricates the mind of your stakeholders by just seeing some scenarios, seeing something tangible, and then building on that as a conversation point, as you mentioned. I think could be really interesting from a VA standpoint. So excellent, thank you, Nikhil. Have you got any techniques or tools that you want to share that you to support your BA storytelling?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks to Paula that bringing in the idea of using videos. Never thought about it, and I'm definitely going to try use this as a technique in coming future. The part that I very much liked about using videos is it actually starts a chain of conversations between the people. Once you watch the video, even if it is like you mentioned, it was like 30 seconds video, not much. But even if you watch a 30 seconds video, it actually starts a chain of conversation. It gives a lot of ideas in people or the team who were not even thinking about any solution or any problem to find out any solution. So once you watch it, that's how the brain, human brain works, right? You watch, you hear, and then you start thinking about it, knowingly, unknowingly, whatsoever. So thank you so much for bringing that idea. One thing that I would like to add is a lot of frameworks that we use is The one that I feel is FAB, which is features, advantage, and benefits. So this is something which I think can be used to present solution, and not just as a function, but in the teams of impact. So when you come up with features, advantages, and benefits, it actually, again, the same thing comes, that people start thinking that these are the features, or these are the advantages of implementing or using these features, and what will be the benefits. So in this direction, at least a thought process starts, where we might not actually reach without any technique. So other than the techniques that we already discussed earlier, so this fab is something which I like most, and role play can one of the technique again, or probably scenarios walkthrough, either scenarios walkthrough or role play. These are also something which gives a strong impact in the team and brings up a good outcome. So these are the two things or techniques I would like to add.
Brilliant, Nikhil. And building on what Paula introduced there. So Paula introduced videos, which I wouldn't have thought about as well. Yourself, you've introduced FAB. I feel like it's putting pressure on Michael now to come up with a technique none of us have heard of. But seriously, over to you, Michael. Share whatever it is you wish to share.
Yeah, I think we definitely talked about user stories earlier, but I would present job stories, which is very similar to user stories. Uh, I think with the job stories, sometimes it's actually better to use those than user stories when you're working on a project that's a little more focused on the outcomes, because user stories are more feature focused, whereas the job stories are more focused on the actual motivations and the kind of like almost like the emotions behind what we're building, right? So that aligns a little bit more with really needing to understand the story behind this feature that we're building. So I just want to bring up job stories because I feel like they're not quite as popular as user stories, but they can be very effective for more outcome-driven projects. And in terms of frameworks, I think that most people are familiar with the STAR method for like job interviews, but I actually like to use the STAR method when I'm eliciting requirements from stakeholders. So as they're giving me high level information, sometimes I will, kind of incorporate the STAR method, the situation, task, the action, and the result. So that might be the structure I'm using as I'm probing a little bit more. So tell me a little bit more about the tasks you were taking, or what your responsibilities are, or the actual actions you were taking, so that I can better understand the steps. And then what was the actual result or the outcome of this particular activity that you were doing, and things like that. So I tend to use STAR when I'm eliciting requirements as a probing kind of a structure.
Yeah.
And it leads to really good outcomes when you're trying to get more clarification from stakeholders that might be presenting you with a little more high level or vague answers. You can really break it down and get the real story behind it using the STAR method there. So that's what I'll add.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Another technique I've not necessarily heard of I don't think I've heard of it at all, actually, STAR. So that's another one to the list. I think for me, I think a couple of things I might share. I think process models are always really useful to be able to paint that story of what it is that's being done, who's doing it, and the interaction points. It also creates sometimes a nice spine to build your story around, particularly as you're learning more about the business and the organization and the stakeholders. So that's definitely one I would throw in there. I think as well, I think they're almost like encouraging some of your stakeholders, particularly where you really want to understand a lot more about what it is they're doing, maybe some of the scenarios, some of the outcomes, is to think about that day in a life, and ask your stakeholders, share with me a day in a life, or share with me what happens on a typical transaction or a typical customer interaction, as it were. So they really focusing on what story or what the story is that you want to focus on and what you can share with them as well. So I think a day in a life can be quite effective in that sense. But you've done an excellent job of talking about some techniques there. So definitely no more to add, I would say.
Can I just add something really quickly?
Yeah.
I know I had mentioned story mapping earlier, but I don't think many teams realize the significance of it. I think most teams really just use it as a prioritization tool, but it really is kind of like a story mapping, like a storytelling tool as well.
Yeah.
Because you really want to organize it initially with, kind of setting up the stories in a way that, high level executives or other teams or project members can really understand the intended functionality or the intended process that we're marching towards here. And then you kind of break it up into, how you want to prioritize it or how you want to release it. But story mapping definitely is a tool. So that goes back to Paula's point earlier about intention. The initial intent is to get everyone to understand what the future state is going to look like by the way we're grouping these stories together. And then we're going to talk about the path we're going to take to deliver it. So I just want to reiterate that.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, Michael, actually, because by you talking about storytelling from a story mapping perspective and talking about the organization that comes with it, also makes me recognize as well that, many of us also find ourselves having to create presentations and PowerPoints for different stakeholders to share what we've learned as well. And I think that is very much a skill of BA. I think we're always learning how to be better at that, and that's always shaped by the stakeholders we work with. So getting that story just right for the level of stakeholder you're engaging with, whether it's super concise or very detailed, it obviously depends. And it sort of introduces a slightly different and interesting way to think about a story, because conventionally you do think about the start, middle, and end. But sometimes when you're putting together a PowerPoint or a presentation to stakeholders, particularly senior ones, sometimes you're actually starting with the end quite a bit, and you're telling them the outcome, so what, and then you're backing it up with a view of what is the start, what's the middle, what supports your recommendation, what supports your findings. So I'm glad you did interject there, Michael, because it's added more examples that we can share. I wonder, we've all been talking rather positively so far about storytelling. Not that I want to turn it too negative, but Nikhil, are there any flaws that you might have observed, whether it's from your own experience or from others, in terms of how to tell, or how they or how you might tell a BA related story?
Yeah. So
storytelling, I guess we go that way.
Yeah, so that's correct. With every positive, there is always some negative associated. There's nothing always positive, everything. So while storytelling is very important and integral part of business analysis, I have observed that a lot of times people fail to understand that not every story or every attempt to explain anything through their storytelling fits all projects. So like Paula earlier mentioned in that she works on every project as a new project, irrespective of any relevance to the previous project. So that is how we should always think about every project, because maybe the end goal of developing any product or anything that we are working on, it would be same, but the way it is worked upon will definitely be different, because the teams are different, stakeholders are different, expectations are different, understandings are different. So one size fits all stories should not be the idea while you opt for storytelling as a technique. And lack of structure is something which is also important aspect of storytelling to keep in mind, because if there is no structure, there is no predefined structure. That should not be a predefined structure as such, I am suggesting, but there should be a structure while you present a story, because unless you have a structure to your story, it will not convey the correct message or correct information to the people or the audience. So
yeah,
And when we talk about structure, it should not be overloaded with a lot of data or a lot of information that is not very much required. By making the story too technical or instead of audience friendly or focused, it will again be not a good thing, because if we make it too technical, then obviously people will not be able to understand. Not everybody has the technical acumen to understand every aspect of technicalities. Maybe using straightforward words instead of jargons, which should be the idea. Because most of the time,
Yeah.
you and me, being a BA or being into the industry for a long time, we might understand the jargons or the short form, but not everybody might know that, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, these are the things that I feel should be avoided or can be considered as a flaw.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikhil. Michael, are there any flaws you might have observed?
Yeah, I'll actually piggyback off of what you were talking about earlier when you're presenting to people and really knowing how to tailor to your audience. So I guess the flaw here would be not tailoring to your audience. And we often refer to that as the audience lens, right? So it's widely known that, an executive would want very high level, maybe even a presentation, very summarized, where your technical team, they're going to want the details. They're going to want
Yeah.
the data mapping and all of that stuff. And so really you want to make sure your story is actually aligned with the audience that you're telling the story to. I think another kind of flaw or pitfall might be telling a story, but not really sure what the goal of the story is. You know, anytime you tell a
Yeah.
story, like I was saying with the deliverables, the business analysis deliverables that all incorporate some type of storytelling, you want to make sure that there's a core takeaway, a core um consensus. Everyone that reads this or everyone that sees this should have an aligned understanding of what's going on. So when we tell these stories, we want everyone to walk away with a very similar understanding or a very similar perception of something, right? So
Yeah.
really starting the story with a goal, right? Making sure that there's a core, what we call moral of the story, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Don't tell a story
Yeah.
just to tell it, right? We want to make sure there is an actual moral to that.
Yeah. You talk about the moral of the story. It definitely made me think about, films, Michael, that, there's been a few that I might have watched over time, and you think this is actually quite interesting. It's got a good start, build up. You start to introduce the characters, get to the middle, and then it ends, and you're like, what? Why have I just wasted my time?
What did we
And
just
it's
watch,
exactly
right?
the same with analysis, right? You want the so what? You want the reason why you've waited and invested the time. So yeah, really interesting point. Definitely resonates with me, as you can tell. Paula, any flaws that you might have observed?
Well, how do I go behind all of that? I'm not really sure. I would say the one thing that hasn't been said that I might emphasize, or maybe it has been said, but it might be has been said differently, is don't make assumptions. Don't assume your audience has a certain level of understanding or they don't have a certain level of understanding. Try to talk to your audience with as much respect and care as possible, because I've seen where people have made assumptions and it does not bode very well for them. So, for
Yeah,
example, I was in a meeting where somebody made an assumption that somebody did not know how to use Google Sheets, right? Just as an example, that is very demeaning, demotivating, insulting, right? And that is not what you want. As Michael talks about the goal is that I want to be able to tell this story so that we get to what we are solving for. But now,
yeah,
if you have made someone feel that they're not valued, or you're assuming that they know what they don't know, that can cause issues and then cause that conflict. So I would say anything I would add to what was already said is just be careful of making assumptions. Always make sure you understand who's in the room and that you don't have to be the one who knows everything in the room. either.
Yeah.
Right. It's okay. You're learning. It's a back and forth. We're learning from each other, just like we all have learned from each other today, right?
That's right.
I
Absolutely.
have
Yeah.
not heard about a job story, Michael. You and I need to talk. Mikhail, the fab was great, I'm gonna remember that now, right? So we all are continuously learning as we're just having these interactions. So the same thing's gonna happen when you're talking to your stakeholders.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I mean, I think on top of what you said as well, I mean, I think and actually think the BA story is probably unlike others. They're not ones for finding the fictional, put it that way. So therefore, if they're not a work of fiction, where's the evidence? So a BA story backed up with some evidence can be really helpful. It can help your stakeholders really buy into the story that you're telling them as well. So having that lack of evidence, a work of fiction, making it unbelievable, that doesn't help, and that will be a challenge for sure. So I think in talking about that, we've sort of given some guidance to people. If you don't want to go out there and write the worst story around business analysis, as it were, try and write a story that doesn't fit the project, that's got no structure, it's way too technical, it's not tailored to your audience, it's got loads of assumptions in there ignored, and make it work of fiction. If you do all those things, you'll be successful in delivering an absolutely terrible story to your audience. So do the opposite, as we're saying. I wonder, have we got time for just one more question? Because I'd like to just squeeze in one more question. Because I recall reading an article a little while ago from, I think Michael referenced Lewis Moreno, I think it was, on my notes. And the point he was making was around leveraging storytelling for effective communication. I made a note of the articles a little while ago. I think you might share it over LinkedIn, Michael, actually, quite possibly. And it made me think, actually, particularly for this session, it'd be interesting to know who you take inspiration from in your storytelling. And as Michael was obviously responsible for sharing that article that I'm recounting, I feel like we should ask him first as to where he gets his inspiration from.
Yes, I think Lewis is definitely a great resource in terms of storytelling. He has a structure of his own that I think many people will be interested in. I don't want to give it away because that's like his intellectual property, but it's very helpful. So definitely, if anyone can find him or get in touch with one of his presentations, I think that will be definitely a good resource in terms of storytelling. But I think in general, just looking at patterns of, movies and uh, videos like YouTube, there's certain things like, very great people that are known for doing, very good YouTube stories, start with the hook and things like that, right? So you start learning these patterns, even in movies where, you go to an action movie and they start off with this action-packed thing, right? That's almost like your hook, right? And then after that, they get into the slow stuff, but you're already hooked in at that point, and then start weaving in the background and the context information. So sometimes it's really just looking for inspiration outside of the BA space, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's really all around. It's really all around. And I do think there are certain roles within project management, like a product manager and maybe a UX designer, who their role really is to tell a story. A product manager tends to go beyond the scope of a product owner, where the product owner focuses more on the end user's experience and how we're gonna, create the product. Where a product manager, they're more so looking at things from the external factor, what's gonna be the market demand for this, right? How can we get this to the market, and what's gonna be the impact from an organizational level, not just the user or the user group level. So I think people that I really like understanding those types of roles where we have to go outside and then kind of, bring it in, right? Those are people that I really like to hear their perspective, because that's a really good way to, start at the top, really understanding that
Yeah.
problem and those goals that we're really marching towards. And then drilling down into the details of the story, getting the context and things like that.
Yeah,
And that goes back to what we were talking about, is starting with the goal or the moral of the story, right?
yeah, that's right. And hook, as you put it, as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paula, do you have anything that you want to share in that respect in terms of your inspiration?
Yeah, so my inspiration for telling stories actually came from a well-known pastor out here, Pastor Mike Householder. What I found very interesting when I would go to church was he didn't do traditional sermons to me in my mind of how I grew up. It was more of he incorporated video, he incorporated skits, he incorporated just talking. It was all the different things that he incorporated in an hour, right? That you
Yeah,
feel that you just went through a movie to get the concepts of what he wanted to focus on for that day. And I did get to tell him when I got selected to speak in South Africa that he was one of my inspirations for how I developed the workshop and what I was going to do in South Africa, because I felt that you have so many different learning styles that are in the audience, and he is catering to all of them. Whether it was intentional or not, he's catering
yeah,
to all of them. So someone might just get it from the verbs or the verbal, some might get it from the visual, right? It was amazing to me how he was able to weave all of that in. So he was definitely one of my inspirations for that. And then I also have to shout out Adrian Reed, because when I would go and I would watch Adrian do presentations, especially when he was keynoting, Adrian would use a lot of analogies and metaphors, and he would also use props in some of his speaking, and it was just engaging. And so when he was telling his story, you felt like you were a part of it. And as I watched, those two in particular came to mind as I was thinking about this question on people who I've watched, and I'm quite sure there's more, but those two just come top of mind to me right now, of people that I've watched, just giving me ideas on how do you engage and connect with your audience. And that's the biggest thing, to connecting to your audience. And they do it so well.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, talking about the keynote speakers and people that are speaking in a public forum is an excellent source of inspiration. I mean, you talk about the seeing Adrian speak, and I've certainly done that. I can definitely attest to what you said. Makes me think as well about others in the BA community, and like Fabrizio, who feels like he probably gets a mention on here every few weeks. He's been a guest a few times as well, so that helps. But yeah, couldn't disagree with that at all, Paula. Nikhil, where'd you get your inspiration from?
Yeah, so this might be a little funny because I come from India, and India is full of movies, if you may know. And movies are most appropriate source of inspiration to take from, where be it storytelling, be it positive thinking, be it inspiring anyone from any downfall or anything. So uh, I've been watching movies for a long time now, and surprisingly, this incident happened long back in one of the project I was working with, and like Paula also mentioned earlier, that we all are learning from each other, right? So this happened personally with me while we were in a discussion, requirement gathering with a couple of stakeholders, and the team were not able to understand what exactly they have to build or what they have to work on. So unknowingly, I explained them, giving a reference of a movie and making them understand that what they were doing in the movie, it is similar to what we have to do here. And I was totally unaware of using a story or using a technique as a storytelling here. And they surprisingly understood in like no time. Later on, when we were having a lunch, so the junior BA who had just joined, he actually called it out, that saying that, you actually started explaining in a storytelling manner, and that's how it actually helped them to understand. That's when it clicked me, and I understood that, yeah, that's correct. Is even in other projects, I should be able to use it, and let's see how it works. That's when I started using storytelling as a technique, and it really helped me. So I started using improving as a technique and skill. We can call it skill as well, because obviously not everybody can speak their mind out or portray in a proper way as a story should be. So like I mentioned earlier, it should be in a structure. So even if you are explaining anything that should be in structure, only then it can be called it as a storytelling. So for me, it is more of a personal inspiration, or to give it a name, I would say that Bollywood movies.
Perfect, excellent, and yeah, I'm very similar. I mean, definitely take inspiration from movies, from sometimes little articles that you might read. Definitely, obviously you already mentioned one. I think I will definitely give a shout out to on this to Lewis as well. I think beyond that as well, I think colleagues would be something that I'd share, because I think I've over the years I definitely worked with some excellent BAs, excellent consultants, just excellent people that are very good at presenting. I think just being open enough to recognise, even if it's little things that people do when telling a story, it doesn't have to be the whole story. Even if it's just, they might be very good at opening, some people, and others might be very good at finishing the story. Just being open enough to recognise when people's style and their techniques that they're applying could be valuable and useful to you, and if it's something you could apply without it becoming alien to you, as it were, because certainly we don't want something that is not natural for our style. But if you see ways that others use to perform and present and tell a story, I think that's always quite easy to do and easy to find people as well. But probably should.
Can I add one more source before you move on to your next segment?
Certainly can.
Sorry, again, this actually, when Paula was speaking and she was talking about the pastor resonating with the audience, it made me think of another source of inspiration. For me, particularly as a content creator, is, that feedback from the audience. They start making comments or asking specific questions. Looking at that feedback and, being able to see, okay, the audience was really engaged when I walk them through the steps of doing something, or when I gave them specific examples, or maybe some content where we started with a case study. These are all examples of how we use story every day, right? But getting that feedback from the audience, and then kind of, again, tailoring the approach or implementing that feedback for the next storytelling situations often leads to better results. So I think for anyone who is in a public speaking space, one source should always be the audiences, looking at the audience and looking at the outcomes and things that you can shift and modify as you move forward.
Yeah, a really valid point, Michael. And I think actually it also makes me think that if we're observing someone who is presenting and telling a story, I think make sure you go and give them some feedback. Obviously good feedback is nice, but if there's things that you didn't quite understand, or things that if they present it a little slightly different way, it might help. It's definitely good feedback for them that they can share as well as encouraging others to give you feedback. And certainly, we can encourage people on here, for example, as you mentioned, to give comments and drop what you'd like to hear more of or less of, or how you think it went. But I feel like this is probably a good place to hold back on the questions now. I mean, we've done our intro. We've therefore covered the start. We've spoken a little bit about storytelling, quite a bit actually, and then we've ended quite well, I hope. So we've got our start, middle, and end for this session. So we'll quit while we're ahead. But all that's left really is to thank each of you. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to hear your views on an interesting topic. Definitely made it a lot more interesting even than I thought it could be as well, and shared some new techniques for all of us that we hadn't perhaps heard, or perspectives. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next time we get together and get to speak. So I'll wait for that time. But thank you in the meantime.